I lay on the cold, steel operating table under the blinding light of the surgical lamp. My chest felt tight, not just from fear, but from something deeper, heavier: betrayal. The soft beep-beep of the heart monitor echoed through the sterile room, each beat hammering the truth further into my soul. My hand trembled as the doctor approached with the anesthesia needle. Through the glass window, I saw her, Kimberly, my daughter-in-law, arms crossed, nodding firmly at the nurse, her face unreadable. She had already cornered me in the hospital hallway earlier, shouting for all to hear. "It's your duty, Martha. You're his mother." She shoved the consent papers into my hands, demanding I sign over my kidney. For her husband. For my son. For Eric. I had already signed. I had already surrendered. But just as the anesthesiologist moved to put me under, the operating room door burst open like a thunderclap. A nurse shouted, "Hey, you can't be in here!" And then I saw him, Caleb, my 9-year-old grandson, sweaty, terrified, clutching a battered old cell phone in both hands like it was a life preserver. "Grandma!" he shouted, his voice cracking through the sterile silence. "Should I tell them the real reason my dad needs your kidney?" The room froze. Even time stood still. 6 months earlier, life had been simple. Not easy, but simple. At 54, I lived in a modest house in Mobile, Alabama, with my husband, Joe, who'd been confined to a wheelchair after a stroke more than a decade ago. The neighborhood was nothing special, just rows of single-story homes with weathered porches and small, well-tended yards. But it was ours. I'd spent years creating our little sanctuary, planting roses that climbed the mailbox and hanging wind chimes that sang with every Gulf breeze. I was Joe's full-time caretaker and had raised 2 sons, Eric, my eldest, charming but always a bit reckless, and Chris, my youngest, quiet, steady, and deeply loyal. They were as different as summer storms and autumn sunsets, but I loved them both with that fierce, complicated love that only mothers understand. Eric had married Kimberly 5 years ago, a woman with a dazzling smile, expensive perfume, and the kind of charm that turned heads at church socials. She wore heels to Sunday service and lipstick that never smudged, even after communion. Her laugh was musical, practiced. At first, I thought I was lucky. Kimberly always said the right things, brought me pie on Sundays, and helped take Eric to his doctor's appointments when his health started to decline. But over time, I began to notice details. Unlabeled pill bottles in their bathroom cabinet when I babysit Caleb. Whispers in the kitchen that stopped the moment I entered. And most of all, Caleb's strange questions. "Grandma," he asked one afternoon while we baked cookies, flour dusting his small nose, "is it bad if someone gives you pills that the doctor didn't say to take?" I should have asked more, but I didn't want to believe something was wrong. The weight of suspicion is heavy, especially when it's aimed at family. Then came the diagnosis. Eric's kidneys were failing rapidly. The doctors couldn't explain the accelerated decline. Healthy 32-year-old men don't typically suffer catastrophic renal failure. Tests were run, specialists consulted, and the conclusion: only a transplant would save him. The family gathered at our small dining table, the one with the scratch from when Eric was 7 and tried to carve his name into it. Joe sat silently in his wheelchair, his eyes sharp despite his immobile body. Chris paced by the window, sunlight catching his furrowed brow. Kimberly stood behind Eric, her manicured hands resting on his shoulders. "They tested all of us," she said, voice cracking with what seemed like perfect anguish. "Only your kidney is a match, Martha." I felt the world shift beneath me. "Are you sure?" I asked, looking at Eric's pale face. "What about Chris? Or your family, Kimberly?" "We've all been tested," she insisted, a flash of something hard crossing her features before dissolving back into concern. "The doctors were clear. It's you or we start planning for the worst." Eric didn't speak. He just looked at me with sunken eyes and trembling hands. Kimberly showed up at my door the next morning with a stack of paperwork. "You're his mother," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "It's your job to keep him alive." She didn't ask. She demanded. In the weeks that followed, our modest home became a battlefield of whispers and tension. Kimberly's parents flew in from Florida, uninvited, and told me over dinner, "It's what any decent mother would do." Their words hung in the air like a threat. Joe squeezed my hand under the table. At night, when we were alone, he whispered, "Something isn't right here, Martha." But what could we do? It was Eric's life on the line. I agreed to the transplant. The hospital scheduled it within 2 weeks. I was terrified, but I convinced myself it was love guiding me. Family. The sacred bond between a mother and her child that transcends reason, that defies logic. But then, strange things started happening. Chris found a strange bottle in Eric's bathroom, unmarked and hidden in the cabinet. "Mom," he said, his voice low as we sat on my porch swing, the bottle cradled in his palm like a dangerous animal. "This isn't from any pharmacy. There's no label, no prescription information. Maybe it's just vitamins," I suggested weakly. Chris's eyes met mine, and I saw the same doubt I felt reflected there. Caleb stopped, smiling. He became quiet, withdrawn, until one day he whispered, "Mom says after your surgery, things will be different. She says the data will be complete." "Data?" I asked, my blood running cold. "What data, sweetheart?" But he just shook his head and returned to his coloring book, pressing the crayon so hard it broke in half. And then came the night before the pre-surgery preparations. Caleb was staying with me while Eric was hospitalized and Kimberly was making arrangements. We were watching his favorite cartoon when he suddenly turned to me, his small face solemn in the blue glow of the television. "Grandma," he said, "if I show you something bad, will you still love me?" "Always," I promised, feeling my heart race. Nothing could ever change that. Caleb pulled out an old flip phone from his backpack. Not his, but one I'd never seen before. "I found this under Mom's side of the bed," he whispered. "There's something you need to hear." And he handed it to me, a recording that would change everything. I stared at the phone in my hand, its weight suddenly unbearable. The plastic felt warm against my palm, as if the secrets it contained were burning through. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the humid Alabama evening, their steady rhythm a counterpoint to my racing heart. "Go ahead, Grandma," Caleb urged, his eyes wide with a worry no 9-year-old should carry. "Press play." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the button. There's a moment before knowledge changes everything, a precious final second of innocence. I lingered there, then pressed down. Kimberly's voice filled the quiet room. "After the transplant, the data will be perfect. She's old and desperate. She won't say no." A male voice I didn't recognize responded, "You're sure the markers will show up in the tissue samples? The pharmaceutical company won't pay without conclusive results." "Trust me," Kimberly laughed, the sound chilling in its casualness. "We've been dosing him for months. His kidneys are failing exactly as predicted. And his mother," she paused, and I could almost hear her smirk. "His mother would cut out her heart if he asked. A kidney is nothing." The recording ended. Caleb watched me, his small hands twisting in his lap. It felt like someone had thrown ice water on my spine. My mind refused to process what I'd just heard, scrambling for alternative explanations. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I'd misunderstood. "Where did you find this?" I asked Caleb, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom doesn't know I have it," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "I heard her on the phone a lot talking about Dad's medicine and tests and money. Then one night I saw her hide this phone after using it. I took it when she was in the shower." His lip trembled. "Am I in trouble?" I pulled him close, feeling his small body shake with sobs against my chest. "No, sweetheart. You're the bravest person I know." I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was mounting. Kimberly wasn't trying to save my son. She was using him. That night, after tucking Caleb into bed with promises that everything would be okay, lies I desperately wanted to make true, I called Chris. My youngest son arrived. Within 20 minutes, his truck tires screeching on the driveway gravel. I played the recording for him, watched as disbelief gave way to fury on his face. "I knew something wasn't right," he growled, pacing my kitchen like a caged animal. "Eric's been getting sicker in ways that don't make medical sense. The doctors keep saying they can't explain the pattern of his decline. We need proof," I said, surprising myself with the steady resolve in my voice. "Something more than a recording that could be explained away." Chris nodded grimly. "I'll follow her tomorrow, see who she's meeting with. And I'll talk to Eric's doctor, privately," I added. "There are questions I should have asked weeks ago." Sleep eluded me that night. I sat by Joe's bedside, watching him breathe, wishing he could speak freely, offer the wise counsel that had guided our family for decades. Though the stroke had limited his speech, his eyes communicated volumes. When I showed him the phone and explained what we'd discovered, his gaze hardened with a clarity that needed no words. The next morning dawned hot and sticky, typical for late August in Mobile. I dressed carefully in my most respectable outfit, a navy dress and cardigan I usually reserved for church, and drove to the hospital alone. The pre-surgery consultation was scheduled for 11 a.m., but I arrived at 9, hoping to catch Dr. Evans before the day's chaos consumed him. Luck was with me. I found him reviewing charts at the nurse's station, his silver hair and kind eyes a steadying presence in the sterile hallway. "Mrs. Harmon," he said warmly. "You're early. Is everything all right? Could we speak privately?" I asked, clutching my purse where the phone lay hidden. In his office, with the door firmly closed, I laid out my concerns. Not the recording, not yet, but the strange pills, Caleb's comments, the rapid progression of Eric's disease. "What supplements has Kimberly been giving Eric?" I asked directly. Dr. Evans frowned, confusion evident in the furrow of his brow. There were no additional prescriptions authorized by this hospital. Wordlessly, I withdrew the unmarked pill bottle Chris had found. Dr. Evans took it, examined the contents with growing alarm. "These are not standard medications," he said slowly. "I need to send these for analysis immediately." He made a quick call, and within minutes, a lab technician arrived. To take the bottle, Dr. Evans turned to me, his expression grave. "Mrs. Harmon, if what you're suggesting is true—" "I know how it sounds," I interrupted. "I know. I'll need to consult with the hospital board," he said. "At minimum, we should delay the transplant until we understand what's happening." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by dread. How would Kimberly react? I didn't have, to wait long to find out. Somehow, through what connections I could only guess, she learned of my private meeting within hours. As I walked through the main hospital corridor toward the cafeteria, her voice sliced through the ambient noise like a blade. "Martha!" she called, heels clicking rapidly against the linoleum. "What did you do?" I turned to face her, noticing for the first time how perfectly calculated her appearance was. The concerned wife in tasteful clothes, makeup suggesting sleepless nights of worry, but not enough to be unattractive. I asked questions, I said simply, the kind I should have asked weeks ago. Her face transformed, the mask of loving daughter-in-law slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. She grabbed my arm, nails digging into my flesh through the cardigan, and pulled me close. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed. "Eric will die without that transplant." "Eric is dying because of you," I countered, surprised by my own boldness. "What are you giving him, Kimberly? What kind of data are you collecting?" Her eyes widened fractionally, enough to confirm I'd hit a nerve, before she schooled her features into outrage. Then, to my shock, she began to cry, loud heaving sobs that drew the attention of everyone in the corridor. "How could you?" she wailed, her voice carrying to every corner of the hallway. "Your own son is dying and you're making up conspiracy theories? He needs you." Nurses turned. A doctor paused mid-stride. An elderly patient in a wheelchair watched with undisguised interest. Kimberly's voice rose even louder as she shouted, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks. "It's your duty. You're his mother. Sign it. Sign it now." She thrust a clipboard at me, the final consent forms, her eyes hard despite the tears. Out of guilt, out of fear, out of the weight of dozens of judging eyes watching a scene constructed to make me the villain, I signed. The surgery was set for the next morning. The hospital moved fast. Too fast. I barely slept. When I called Chris, he didn't answer, and I feared the worst, until he texted, following a lead, "Trust me. Stall if you can." But how could I stall? By morning, I was being prepped for surgery, the hospital gown thin and inadequate against the chill of the pre-op room. Kimberly appeared briefly, all traces of yesterday's emotion gone, replaced by efficient satisfaction. "I knew you'd do the right thing," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "A mother always sacrifices." As they wheeled me into the operating theater, I caught a glimpse of Caleb in the waiting area, sitting unnaturally still, his small face a mask of fear. Our eyes met for just a moment. I hadn't told him about my decision, about my surrender, but little did I know he had a plan. The moment the operating room door flew open, time itself seemed to fracture. Caleb stood there, 9 years old and trembling with a courage that belied his small stature. The old phone clutched in his hands like a shield against the adult world that had failed him. Behind him, a nurse was frantically trying to pull him back. "Young man, you absolutely cannot be in." "Here!" Dr. Evans shouted, his surgical mask rippling with indignation. I struggled to lift my head from the operating table. "Caleb!" My grandson's eyes found mine, wide with fear but blazing with determination. Grandma, they've been poisoning Dad. Mom and her parents. They're using him for some kind of drug test. The anesthesiologist froze, needle suspended midair. The surgical team exchanged glances. Through the observation window, I saw Kimberly's face transform from shock to rage as she pounded on the glass. "Get him out of here!" she screamed, her voice muffled but audible. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." But something in her panic told me otherwise. "Please," I said to Dr. Evans, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let him speak." The surgeon hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Quickly, son." Caleb approached the table, careful not to touch the sterile field. He tapped the screen of the old flip phone, his small fingers trembling. "I found Mom's secret phone," he said. "She only uses it when she talks to her parents or someone named Dr. Mercer. Listen." He pressed play, and Kimberly's voice filled the operating room. "The kidney transplant is perfect for the final phase. His mother won't back out. She's too guilt-ridden to refuse. Once we have the comparison data between the affected kidney and the transplant, Mercer Pharmaceuticals will finalize the deal. 7 figures, minimum." A male voice responded, "And you're certain the dosage won't be traced? These symptoms aren't naturally occurring." "Of course not," Kimberly laughed, the sound cold and unfamiliar. "I've been careful. Small doses, administered consistently. The doctors think it's autoimmune. No one suspects a thing." The recording ended. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis, leaving me struggling for balance even though I was lying perfectly still. Dr. Evans slowly lowered his scalpel. "Mrs. Harmon, I'm suspending this procedure immediately." Through the window, I watched as security personnel stepped toward Kimberly, who was now frantically trying to leave. A nurse was already on the phone, her voice urgent as she requested police presence. "I've been suspecting something wasn't right with your son's case," Dr. Evans said quietly. "The progression was too rapid, too textbook, but this—" He shook his head in disbelief. I reached for Caleb's hand, squeezing his small fingers in mine. "When did you discover this, sweetheart?" "Last month," he whispered. "I found Mom's phone when I was looking for my Nintendo. She keeps it in her jewelry box. I heard her talking and I was scared, Grandma." His voice broke. "She was hurting Dad. My own mom was making him sick." Tears slid down his cheeks, and I felt my heart break for this child who'd been carrying such a terrible burden alone. "You did the right thing," I assured him. "You were so brave." As the surgical team began dismantling the equipment around me, Chris burst into the room, followed by hospital security. His face was flushed with exertion, his eyes wild with worry until they landed on me, still whole, still uncut. "Mom," he exclaimed. "Thank God. I got here as fast as I could." He turned to Caleb, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You actually did it, buddy, just like we planned." "You knew?" I asked, struggling to sit up as a nurse removed my IV. Chris nodded grimly. "I had suspicions for weeks. The unmarked pills, Eric's symptoms coming and going, Kimberly's strange phone calls. But I needed proof." He glanced at Caleb with unmistakable pride. That's where Caleb came in. Brave little detective. Beyond the operating room doors, I could hear raised voices. Kimberly's shrill protests, the firm responses of security personnel, someone reading Miranda rights. The world I thought I knew was crumbling, replaced by something darker and more complex. Yet amid the chaos, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The fog of manipulation and guilt that had surrounded me for months was lifting. I had almost given a piece of myself based on a monstrous lie, but the truth had arrived just in time, carried by the smallest, bravest member of our family. "What happens now?" I asked softly. Dr. Evans removed his surgical mask, his expression somber. "The police will want statements from everyone. There will be an investigation, both criminal and medical. Your son will need proper treatment, real treatment, to detoxify from whatever substances he's been given." He paused. "It's going to be a difficult road ahead." Chris helped me sit up, his strong hands steady against my back. "We'll get through it, Mom, together." Caleb climbed onto the edge of the bed, careful of the wires and tubes still attached to me. "Dad will get better now, right?" he asked, his young voice fragile with hope. "Yes," I promised, though I knew recovery would be complicated. Without those poisons in his system, he'll start healing. I stroked his hair, marveling at this child who'd saved not 1 but 2 lives today, and we'll all be there to help him. As they wheeled me from the operating room, not to surgery, but to recovery, I caught a glimpse of Kimberly being led away in handcuffs, her perfectly composed facade shattered, revealing the desperation beneath. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw not just anger, but a profound emptiness that almost inspired pity. Almost. "Mrs. Harmon," a detective said, falling into step beside my gurney, "when you're feeling up to it, we'd like to take your statement." "I'll tell you everything I know," I assured him. "But first, I need to see my son." The hospital room where they'd placed Eric looked out over the mobile skyline, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city. He lay sleeping, monitors beeping softly beside him, his face still gaunt but somehow more peaceful than I'd seen in months. Without Kimberly's poisons coursing through his system, his body had already begun the slow process of healing. I sat in the visitor's chair, watching the rise and fall of his chest, while Chris spoke quietly with Dr. Evans in the hallway. Caleb had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled up on a cot the nurses had brought in, his small hand still clutching the old flip phone that had changed everything. When Eric's eyes fluttered, open, they were clearer than I'd seen in months. The fog of whatever drugs Kimberly had been giving him was beginning to lift. He looked at me, confusion etched across his features. "Mom?" he whispered, voice raspy. "What happened? Where's Kimberly?" I reached for his hand, feeling the prominent bones beneath his skin. "Eric, there's a lot I need to tell you, and it won't be easy to hear." Over the next hour, I explained everything. The recording, the investigation now underway, the preliminary toxicology reports that showed traces of compounds that shouldn't be in his system. With each revelation, I watched his face transform. Shock, disbelief, devastation, and finally, a terrible understanding. "She was poisoning me," he said flatly. "My wife was slowly killing me." "Not killing, I corrected gently. "Using you. For drug trials, it seems. The details are still emerging, but it appears Kimberly's parents have connections to Mercer Pharmaceuticals. They were testing how their new drug interacted with kidney function." Eric turned to look at Caleb, still sleeping peacefully. "And my son knew? He discovered it, recorded it, and then he saved us both." I squeezed Eric's hand. "He loves you so much, Eric. Enough to stand up to his own mother." Tears slid down Eric's hollow cheeks. "I don't deserve either of you." "Family isn't about deserving," I told him. "It's about belonging." The door opened and Chris entered with Dr. Evans and a woman in a police uniform who introduced herself as Detective Rivera. "Mr. Harmon," she said, her tone professional but kind. "I understand you've been briefed on the situation. When you're feeling up to it, we'll need to take your statement." Eric nodded weakly. "Whatever you need. I want her to pay for what she's done." Dr. Evans stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "We've started a detoxification protocol. The substances in your system appear to be experimental nephrotoxins, compounds that specifically target kidney function. The good news is, without continued exposure, your kidneys should recover significantly, though there may be some permanent damage." "So I don't need a transplant?" Eric asked, looking between the doctor and me. "Not at this time," Dr. Evans confirmed. "We'll continue to monitor your function, but I believe with proper treatment, you can regain much of your kidney function naturally." Relief washed over me, not just because my kidney would remain where it belonged, but because my son wouldn't have to live with the guilt of accepting such a sacrifice based on a terrible lie. As the detective and doctor discussed treatment plans and legal proceedings, Chris pulled me aside, his voice low. "Mom, there's something else you should know. The police searched Kimberly's personal effects and found documentation, emails, notes, recordings. This wasn't just about pharmaceuticals. There was insurance involved, a multi-million-dollar policy on your life." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? They were planning to have you donate your kidney, then ensure you didn't survive the recovery," he said grimly. "The policy would pay out to Eric, which means to Kimberly, as his wife. And they'd have their drug trial data too." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the windowsill for support, looking out at the city below, the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the darkness that could lurk within the hearts of those closest to you. "Does Eric know this part?" I whispered. Chris shook his head. "Not yet. The detective thought it best to share that detail when he's stronger." I nodded, understanding the mercy in that decision. My son had already learned his wife was poisoning him. Discovering she'd planned his mother's death might break him completely. As the sun set over Mobile, casting golden light across the hospital room, Caleb stirred from his sleep. He blinked, eyes finding his father in the hospital bed, then me standing by the window. Dad? He asked cautiously, sliding off the cot. Are you okay? Eric opened his arms, and Caleb ran to him, burying his face against his father's chest. I'm getting better, buddy, Eric promised, his voice thick with emotion. Thanks to you. I was scared, Caleb admitted, his words muffled. Mom said not to tell anyone about her special medicine for you. She said it was just vitamins, to make you strong. But then I heard her talking about experiments and money, and you kept getting sicker instead of better. Eric held his son tighter, his gaze meeting mine over the boy's head. The anguish in his eyes spoke volumes. The betrayal of a spouse was devastating enough, but knowing your child had witnessed such calculated cruelty was another level of pain entirely. You did the right, thing, Eric assured him. You were so brave, braver than most grown-ups would be. As I watched them, I felt Chris's hand on my shoulder, steady and supportive. Our family had been fractured by Kimberly's betrayal, but not broken. The bonds between us, between grandmother and grandson, mother and sons, father and child, had proven stronger than her manipulation and deceit. Later that evening, after Caleb had fallen asleep again, and Eric had given his preliminary statement to Detective Rivera, I stepped into the hallway for a moment of quiet reflection. The hospital corridor was dimly lit, the night shift moving with hushed efficiency. Mrs. Harmon? I turned to find Dr. Evans approaching, his white coat exchanged for street clothes, ready to head home after this extraordinary day. I wanted to check on you before I left, he said. How are you holding up? I considered the question, searching for the right words. I feel liberated, I finally said, horrified by what almost happened, but grateful for the truth. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. In my years of practice, I've seen the darker side of human nature, but this case, he shook his head. The deliberate poisoning, the planned transplant that was never medically necessary, the insurance policy. The police told you about that too, I noted. Yes, it's relevant to the medical aspects of the case. He hesitated. Mrs. Harmon, you were moments away from an unnecessary surgery that was part of a much darker plan. I think it's important you understand just how close a call this was. I do, I assured him, and I'll never forget it. But I also won't let it define us. My family is stronger than her schemes. As Dr. Evans left, I returned to Eric's room, taking my place in the chair beside his bed. In the soft glow of the monitoring equipment, watching over my son and grandson as they slept, I felt something unexpected blossoming in my heart. Not just relief or gratitude, but a quiet strength that came from facing the unimaginable and surviving. The chains of manipulation that had bound us for so long were finally broken. Whatever came next, we would face it together, with truth as our foundation. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of medical appointments, police statements, and court hearings. Mobile's autumn settled over the city, painting the trees in amber and gold, while our family navigated the aftermath of Kimberly's betrayal. The story made headlines. Wife poisons husband for pharmaceutical trial. 9-year-old hero exposes medical conspiracy, transforming our private trauma into public spectacle. I sheltered Caleb from the worst of it, creating a sanctuary at my modest home where he could simply be a child again. Eric remained in the hospital, undergoing treatment to reverse the damage Kimberly had inflicted, while Chris handled the press and legal matters with quiet efficiency. Our family closed ranks, protecting each other from the storm that raged around us. One morning in late October, I sat on my porch swing with Joe beside me in his wheelchair, his hand resting in mine. Though his stroke had robbed him of speech, his eyes remained expressive, today filled with a mixture of sorrow and righteous anger, as I read him the latest developments from the newspaper. Kimberly's parents were arrested yesterday, I told him. Conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, the list goes on. Their connections to Mercer Pharmaceuticals run deep. Apparently, this wasn't their first trial, just the first one where they got caught. Joe squeezed my fingers, his touch, communicating what his voice could not. I know, I responded to his unspoken question. I keep wondering how many others there were, how many families they've destroyed. The screen door creaked open as Caleb stepped out, clutching a bowl of cereal. In the 3 weeks since that day in the operating room, he'd begun to shed the haunted look in his eyes. Regaining bits of childhood innocence I'd feared were lost forever. Grandma, he said, settling cross-legged on the porch floor, when can Dad come home? Soon, sweetheart. The doctors say maybe next week. I reached down to ruffle his hair. His kidneys are getting stronger every day. And he'll stay here with us, right? Not at our old house? The question carried weight beyond his years. The colonial home Eric had shared with. Kimberly now stood empty, police tape still crossing the entrance after investigators had combed it for evidence. No one had discussed what would happen next, but I understood Caleb's fear. That house held memories of betrayal too fresh to confront. For as long as he needs to, I assured him. This is your home now, too. Caleb nodded, satisfaction crossing his features as he returned to his cereal. The simple certainty of a child, that home wasn't a place but the people who kept you safe, seemed suddenly profound. Later that afternoon, Chris arrived with news. "Mom," he called, striding up the porch steps, file folders tucked under his arm. "Kimberly's taking a plea deal." I ushered him inside, away from Caleb, who was playing in the yard with neighborhood children, a normal activity. That had seemed impossible just weeks ago. In the kitchen, Chris spread documents across the table. She's giving up everyone. Her parents, their contacts at Mercer, even some doctor who previously helped them with similar trials, in exchange for reduced sentencing. How reduced? I asked, my throat tight. 15 years instead of 30. No possibility of parole for at least 10. He met my eyes steadily. She'll be behind bars until Caleb is an adult. A complicated relief washed over me. Not justice. Nothing could truly be justice for what she'd done, but protection. Time for Eric to heal, for Caleb to grow up without her shadow looming over him. Has Eric been told? Chris nodded. I came from the hospital. He's processing it. Asked to be alone for a while. I understood. Despite everything, Eric had loved Kimberly once, had built a life with her, created a child with her. The finality of her sentencing would bring complicated emotions, even amid the relief. There's something else, Chris said, pulling out another document. The judge granted the restraining order. She can't contact any of us. Not Eric, not Caleb, not even through letters. Good, I said firmly. That boy needs a clean break to heal. As twilight settled over Mobile, painting the sky in watercolors of pink and lavender, I sat at Joe's bedside, helping him prepare for sleep. His evening routine had become a meditation for us both. The gentle washing of his face, the careful changing into nightclothes, the arrangement of pillows to prevent pressure sores. The police returned my old phone today. I told him as I smoothed his blanket. The one Caleb used to record Kimberly. They're done with it as evidence. Joe's eyes questioned me. I'm keeping it, I said. Not to dwell on what happened, but to remember how truth can arrive in unexpected packages. I leaned down to kiss his forehead, and how sometimes the smallest among us show the greatest courage. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the yard while cicadas hummed their endless summer song. The events of the past months played through my mind like scenes from someone else's life. The diagnosis, the manipulation, the moment of terrible revelation in that operating room. I'd come so close to sacrificing a piece of myself based on a lie. The thought still sent shivers down my spine. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris. Eric's being discharged Thursday. Doctor says recovery at 60% and climbing. I smiled into the darkness. My son was coming home, not completely healed. None of us were, but alive and free from Kimberly's poison. It was enough. It had to be enough. The back door creaked, and I turned to find Caleb standing there in dinosaur pajamas, his hair mussed from sleep. Nightmare? I asked gently. He nodded, climbing onto the porch swing beside me. Mom was chasing me with a needle. Said it was just vitamins, but it was glowing green. I wrapped my arm around his small shoulders, drawing him close. It was just a dream. She can't hurt you or your dad anymore. I know, he said, resting his head against me. But sometimes I still get scared. That's normal, I assured him. Fear takes time to fade, but it will, little by little. We sat in silence for a while, the swing creaking softly as we rocked. Then Caleb asked a question that caught me off guard. Grandma, are you still sad you didn't give Dad your kidney? I considered my answer carefully. I'm sad it was all based on lies, but I'm grateful the truth came out before the surgery. And most of all, I'm happy your dad is getting better without needing anyone's kidney at all. Dad said sometimes the body can heal itself if you just stop hurting it, Caleb observed. That's very wise, I said, struck by how perfectly this applied not just to physical healing, but emotional recovery as well. I think that's true for hearts and minds too, not just bodies. As Caleb dozed against me, I gazed up at the star-scattered sky, feeling something settle within me, a peace I hadn't expected to find so soon. The ripples of truth were still spreading outward from that moment in the operating room, touching every aspect of our lives, reshaping our family into something different, but perhaps ultimately stronger than before. Eric came home on a Thursday morning bright with autumn sunshine. Chris helped him from the car, supporting his still frail form up the porch steps, while Caleb danced around them like an excited puppy. I stood in the doorway, throat tight with emotion at the sight of my son, thinner, paler, but unmistakably improving. "Welcome home," I said, stepping forward to embrace him gently. He leaned into my arms, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Thanks, Mom. For everything." Those simple words carried the weight of all we'd been through. Not just the recent betrayal, but the years of distance that had grown between us before Kimberly entered our lives. A distance I now understood she had deliberately widened as part of her manipulation. "Your room's all set up," I told him, leading the way inside. "And Joe's excited to see you." My husband sat in his wheelchair by the window, sunlight illuminating his weathered face. When he spotted Eric, his eyes lit up with joy, his gnarled hand extending in welcome. Eric crossed the room to clasp it, kneeling beside the chair. "Hey, Dad," he said softly. "I've missed you." That first day home established a new rhythm for our household. Eric's medication schedule, his dietary restrictions, his afternoon rests, becoming the framework around which we built our lives. Caleb settled into the routine with surprising ease, helping me prepare kidney-friendly meals and reminding his father when it was time for pills or rest. Dr. Evans visited weekly to monitor Eric's progress, bringing encouraging reports of kidney function slowly returning to normal. "Your body is resilient," he told Eric during one such visit. "Without the toxins in your system, you're healing faster than I expected." "When can I go back to work?" Eric asked. His job at the architectural firm had been held for him, the partners horrified by what had happened and insistent that his position would wait. "Start with half days next month," Dr. Evans suggested. "See how your energy holds up. No rushing. Your body needs time." Time, I seemed, was both enemy and friend. We had too much of it in empty hours that allowed dark thoughts to creep in, yet never enough as we tried to rebuild shattered trust and routines. The clock on my kitchen wall ticked steadily onward, marking days that blended together in a strange limbo between crisis and recovery. One evening, as I prepared dinner with Caleb as my enthusiastic assistant, Eric entered the kitchen with an envelope in hand. "What's that?" I asked, noting the official seal. "Divorce papers," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Final decree. It's over." Caleb looked up from the carrots he was peeling. "So, Mom's not our family anymore, officially?" Eric knelt to his son's level. "She'll always be your mother, buddy. That doesn't change, but she and I aren't married anymore, and she won't be living with us again." Caleb nodded solemnly. "Good. She hurt you." The simple clarity of a child's moral compass, the recognition that love should never encompass harm, struck me like a physical force. Later, after Caleb was in bed, Eric and I sat on the back porch with cups of herbal tea, watching the moon rise over the pecan trees in the yard. "I keep wondering when I'll stop feeling like a fool," he confessed. 5 years, Mom. 5 years I never suspected what she was doing. Because normal people don't suspect the ones they love of poisoning them," I pointed out. "That's not foolishness. It's humanity." Chris never trusted her. "Chris is naturally suspicious," I said with a small smile. And even he didn't imagine anything this sinister. He just thought she was cold, maybe unfaithful. "Not this." Eric sighed, the sound weighted with regret. "I should have listened to you both more. Should have questioned why she insisted on preparing all my food, administering my supplements herself." He shook his head. "The signs were there. Hindsight makes prophets of us all," I said gently. "You can't rewrite the past, Eric. You can only decide how it shapes your future." The following Sunday, we attended church together for the first time since Eric's return home. Our small Methodist congregation had sent cards, flowers, and casseroles throughout the ordeal, but facing them in person was another matter entirely. As we walked up the steps to the white clapboard building, I felt Eric hesitate beside me. "Everyone knows," he murmured, "about Kimberly, about what happened." "Yes," I acknowledged. "And they're on your side." Sure enough, as we entered the sanctuary, we were met with warm smiles, gentle handshakes, and murmured words of support. No prying questions, no barely concealed curiosity, just genuine welcome. Pastor Williams clasped Eric's hand between both of his, saying simply, "We've been praying for your healing, son. All kinds of healing." During the service, as the choir sang about grace and redemption, I watched Eric's shoulders gradually relax. Community was its own kind of medicine, I realized, the antidote to isolation that Kimberly had so carefully cultivated around our family. November brought cold snaps that painted frost on the windows and sent us searching for extra blankets. It also brought the first major holiday we would face without Kimberly, Thanksgiving, traditionally held at Eric and Kimberly's home with elaborate decorations and picture-perfect place settings that somehow always left us feeling slightly inadequate. We should do something completely different this year, Chris suggested during a family dinner. No turkey, no traditions. Maybe order Chinese food and watch movies all day. Eric considered this, then shook his head. No, I don't want Caleb to feel like everything in his life has been disrupted. Some traditions should stay. Then we'll host here, I decided. Nothing fancy, just family, good food, and gratitude. I glanced at Caleb. Maybe you can help me make the pies. His face lit up. Can we make chocolate and pumpkin and apple? All three, I promised, ignoring Eric's mock groan about diet restrictions. Some occasions called for exceptions. The Monday before Thanksgiving, as Caleb was at school and Eric at a doctor's appointment, Detective Rivera stopped by with an update. Thought you should know, she said, accepting the coffee I offered. Mercer Pharmaceuticals is facing federal charges. What happened to your son wasn't isolated. We've identified at least 7 other victims across 3 states. I sank into a chair. 7 families, all targeted the same way. Spouse or parent with connection to pharmaceutical research identifies vulnerable victim, creates dependency, administers experimental compound to generate comparison data. She shook her head in disgust. The Lawrences, Kimberly's parents, were apparently their star research team. Will those families be notified? The victims? Already happening, she assured me. And there will be a victim compensation fund established as part of the settlement. She hesitated. There's something else. In light of the broader conspiracy, the prosecutor is reconsidering Kimberly's plea deal. They may push for the full 30 years after all. I absorbed this information, surprised by my lack of vindictive satisfaction. Justice mattered, yes, but it couldn't undo what had been done. Couldn't erase the scars left on my son and grandson. Whatever happens, I said finally, I just want my family to heal. Detective Rivera nodded, understanding. For what it's worth, Mrs. Harmon, your grandson saved more than just his father and you. His recording broke open a case that will protect countless others. After she left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching leaves skitter across the yard in the November wind. The detective's words echoed in my mind, how Caleb's courage had created ripples far beyond our family, touching lives of strangers who would never know his name. Reconstruction wasn't just about rebuilding what had been broken. It was about creating something new from the pieces, something perhaps stronger at the mended places. As I began preparations for Thanksgiving dinner, I felt a quiet hope taking root, that from this terrible chapter might grow wisdom, compassion, and a deeper appreciation for the genuine bonds of family. That evening, watching Eric help Caleb with his math homework at the kitchen table, I glimpsed the future we were building. Imperfect, scarred, but authentic in a way our lives hadn't been for years. The long shadow of Kimberly's betrayal was slowly receding, allowing new growth in the spaces where deception had once flourished. Spring came early to Mobile that year, as if nature itself was eager to wash away the remnants of our difficult winter. Azaleas bloomed in riotous pink and white along my garden path, and the dogwood tree Eric and I had planted when Caleb was born unfurled delicate blossoms against the blue Alabama sky. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in the operating room. 6 months of healing, of rebuilding, of finding our way forward. In the kitchen, Caleb sat at the table crafting handmade invitations, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he carefully wrote each name. Do you think 20 people will fit in our backyard, Grandma? He asked, looking up from his work. For your 10th birthday? We'll make them fit, I assured him, smiling at the transformation I'd witnessed in him over these months. The shadows had faded from his eyes, replaced by the bright curiosity appropriate to his age. Weekly sessions with a child psychologist had helped him process the trauma of his mother's betrayal without being defined by it. Eric entered, dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks, his work attire now that he'd returned to the architectural firm full-time. His body had recovered remarkably well. Dr. Evans called it a testament to human resilience at his last checkup. His kidneys would never be perfect, but they functioned well enough for a normal life with proper medication and monitoring. Looking sharp, Dad, Caleb commented, admiring his father's appearance. Eric grinned, ruffling his son's hair. Big presentation today. Renovation project for the History Museum. He poured himself coffee, glancing at the calendar on the refrigerator where court dates had once dominated, now replaced by school events, doctor appointments, and Caleb's baseball schedule. Don't forget I'm picking you up early for your dental appointment. I won't, Caleb promised, returning to his invitations. The domesticity of the scene struck me. How ordinary it was, how precious in its normalcy. We had created a new rhythm in this household, the three of us plus Joe, finding balance in our shared care and companionship. Chris visited often, sometimes bringing Sarah, the kind-eyed nurse he'd met during Eric's hospital stay, and had been dating since Christmas. As Eric prepared to leave for work, he paused beside me at the sink. Have you thought more about what we discussed? I nodded, drying my hands on a dish towel. I have, and I think you're right. It's time. The previous evening, Eric had broached a subject we'd been dancing around for weeks, the sale of his, and Kimberly's house. It had stood empty all these months, a silent monument to betrayal that none of us could bear to enter. Even after crime scene cleaners had removed all evidence, even after realtors had suggested renovations to make it marketable, it remained untouched, frozen in time like the moment before Caleb had burst into that operating room. I'll call the realtor today, Eric said, relief evident in his voice. We can use the money to add that extension here. A proper bedroom for Caleb, maybe a study for me. He hesitated. Unless you'd rather we find our own place eventually. I don't want to impose indefinitely. This is your home, I said firmly, for as long as you both want it to be. The extension is a perfect idea. After Eric left for work and Caleb for school, I sat, with Joe on the back porch, enjoying the spring sunshine. His health had stabilized in recent months. Though the stroke had left him unable to speak or walk, his mind remained sharp, his eyes expressive. We had developed our own communication system, blinks, hand squeezes, subtle facial expressions that spoke volumes to someone who had loved him for 35 years. The trial starts next week, I told him, referring to the federal case against Mercer Pharmaceuticals and the Lawrences. Eric's testifying, but they're not making Caleb appear in person. They'll use his recorded statement instead. Joe's fingers tightened around mine, a gesture of support. Kimberly took the expanded plea deal, I continued. 25 years? The prosecutor says she's still providing evidence against the larger conspiracy. I sighed, watching bees hover around the blooming wisteria. I keep wondering if she ever loved them at all. Eric and Caleb, if any part of it was real. Joe's expression softened, his eyes meeting mine with a question I understood immediately. No, I don't hate her, I admitted. I should, perhaps. But mostly I feel pity. What emptiness must exist in a person to do what she did? What hollowness at her core? I shook my head. It doesn't excuse anything, but hating her would only keep us tethered to the pain. Later that afternoon, I visited the community center where I'd started volunteering 3 months prior. What began as a way to fill empty hours had become a meaningful part of my recovery, teaching art classes to seniors and helping coordinate a support group for families affected by chronic illness. Today, a new member had joined our circle, Margaret, whose husband had recently been diagnosed with kidney disease. I'm so scared, she confessed during our coffee break, voice trembling. The doctors say he'll need dialysis soon, maybe eventually a transplant. I don't know how to help him through this. I placed my hand over hers. One day at a time, advised. And remember to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. I shared resources, practical advice about managing medications and dietary restrictions, but carefully omitted the darker elements of my family's experience. This woman needed hope, not horror stories. Still, as I drove home afterward, I reflected on how our worst experiences could sometimes become a lifeline. For others, how suffering, when processed and integrated, might transform into wisdom. The following Sunday, after church, Pastor Williams pulled me aside. Martha, I have a favor to ask. There's a family in the congregation, the Taylors, who are going through something similar to what Eric experienced. Not the criminal aspect, thank God, but the medical crisis, the strain on family bonds. Would you be willing to reach out to them? I hesitated only briefly before nodding. Of course. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone. That evening, as we gathered for our weekly Sunday dinner, now a cherished tradition that included Chris and Sarah, I shared the pastor's request. Eric looked up from carving the roast. Do you want me to come with you? Sometimes it's easier to hear from someone who's, been through it directly. If you're comfortable with that, I said, touched by his offer. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, a year ago I wouldn't have been able to talk about any of this. Would have been too ashamed, too angry. He glanced around the table at his son laughing with Chris, at Joe contentedly observing the family he'd helped build, at Sarah who had entered our lives because of tragedy, but brought only joy. Now it feels like, I don't know, like there's purpose in the pain somehow. Chris raised his glass. To finding meaning in the mess, he toasted, his voice gentle with understanding. We clinked glasses, the simple gesture sealing a profound transformation. We were no longer merely survivors of Kimberly's betrayal. We were becoming something more, witnesses to resilience, testament to the healing power of truth and time. As spring deepened into early summer, the foundation was poured for the home extension, concrete blocks forming the outline of new rooms that would expand our living space and symbolize our commitment to this shared life. Caleb helped the workers whenever allowed, proudly wearing the small hard hat the foreman had given him, learning the names of tools and the basics of construction. I think I want to be an architect like Dad, he announced one evening as we watched the sunset from the porch, the framework of the addition taking shape against the dimming sky. Or maybe a doctor like Dr. Evans, something that helps build things or fix people. I smiled, hearing in his words the synthesis of all he had experienced, the destruction, and the healing, the breaking, and the making whole again. You'll be wonderful at whatever you choose, I told him, marveling at how from the darkest soil can grow the most beautiful blooms. New foundations were being laid, not just in concrete and wood, but in trust and truth, materials far more durable than deception could ever be. 1 year to the day after Caleb burst into the operating room, we held a celebration, not of the trauma, but of the truth that had saved us. A quiet gathering in our expanded home, with its new rooms now filled with life and light. The extension had been completed in late summer, providing Caleb with a spacious bedroom decorated with solar system decals, and Eric with a study where he could work from home when needed. We called it our truth wing, a private joke, that transformed something painful into a point of pride. The autumn afternoon was perfect, crisp enough for sweaters but sunny enough for an outdoor gathering. Friends from church, colleagues from Eric's firm, Chris and Sarah, now engaged, and even Dr. Evans and Detective Rivera joined us for what we simply called our gratitude gathering. No one outside our closest circle knew the significance of the date, but we did. A private commemoration of the moment our family had been saved by a child's courage. As everyone enjoyed the buffet spread across tables in the backyard, Detective Rivera approached me, a manila envelope in her hand. I wanted to deliver this personally, she said, her professional demeanor softening with genuine warmth. The case against Mercer Pharmaceuticals was settled yesterday. This contains information about the victim compensation fund I mentioned. She hesitated. It won't undo what happened, but it might help secure Caleb's future. I accepted the envelope with mixed emotions. Thank you for everything you've done for our family. Your family did the hard part, she replied, especially that brave boy of yours. She nodded toward Caleb, who was showing his baseball trophies to Dr. Evans. The pharmaceutical executives received federal prison sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The Lawrences got 30 years each, and the legal precedents established by this case will protect countless families in the future. She squeezed my arm gently. That's your legacy, Martha. Your family turned private pain into public protection. As Detective Rivera moved away to join other guests, I felt Eric approach, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. Everything okay? He asked, offering me a drink. I showed him the envelope. The settlement came through. He nodded, his expression contemplative rather than triumphant. I've been thinking about what to do with that money. Some of it should go to a trust for Caleb, obviously, but the rest. He looked around at our gathered friends and family. I'm considering starting a foundation for families affected by medical fraud or experimental drug abuse. A resource center, maybe legal aid. That sounds perfect, I said, pride swelling in my chest at the man my son had become through adversity. The architect in him was evident even now, designing something constructive from the rubble of betrayal. As twilight approached, guests began to depart with warm hugs and promises to return soon. Chris helped Joe inside as the evening air cooled, while Sarah and Caleb gathered plates and glasses from around the yard. Eric and I found ourselves alone by the old oak tree that had witnessed generations of our family's story. You know what I realized today? Eric said softly. Haven't thought about Kimberly in weeks. Not with anger, not with grief, just nothing. I understood the significance of this admission. For months after the truth emerged, thoughts of Kimberly had haunted him. Nightmares about what might have happened, rage at her betrayal, confusion about how he could have been so deceived. The emotional wounds had seemed as debilitating as the physical ones at times. That's healing, I told him. Not forgetting, but continuing. Living in the present instead of the past. From inside came the sound of laughter, Caleb showing Chris a new magic trick he'd learned at school. The simple joy in that sound was perhaps our greatest victory, that a child who had witnessed such darkness could still find light, still trust, still laugh without reservation. I never thanked you properly, Eric said suddenly. Not just for being willing to give me your kidney, but for creating a home for us when ours had been poisoned in every sense, for helping Caleb heal, for never saying, I told you so, even though you had every right. That's not what mothers do, I said simply. No, but it's what you did. He embraced me then, my tall son bending to rest, his head briefly on my shoulder like he used to do as a child. Thank you. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, I sat in the new window seat of the extension, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Joe was asleep in our room, Caleb and Eric in theirs. The envelope from Detective Rivera lay open beside me. Its contents, legal documents, a substantial check, information about ongoing support services, a tangible reminder of all we had endured. I thought about Kimberly, serving her sentence in a federal women's prison hundreds of miles away. The anger I'd once felt toward her had gradually transformed into something more complex, a mixture of pity for the emptiness that must drive someone to such calculated cruelty and gratitude for the strength we'd discovered in ourselves while overcoming it. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no moment where I would stand before her and declare victory or demand answers. Our triumph was quieter, more profound, simply living well, rebuilding what she had tried to destroy, finding joy despite her attempts to engineer our suffering. In the garden below, the rose bushes I'd planted in spring had flourished, their late blooms still visible in the moonlight. I'd chosen them carefully, the resilience variety, known for surviving harsh conditions and returning year after year with increased vigor, a fitting metaphor for what our family had become. The old saying about time healing all wounds wasn't quite accurate, I reflected. Time alone couldn't heal. It merely created space for healing to occur. The work was still ours, the choice to move forward, to let go of bitterness, to rebuild rather than retreat. And we had done that work, day by day, moment by moment, supporting each other through the darkest hours until light gradually returned. As I prepared to close the window against the night chill, I noticed Caleb standing in the doorway of the sitting room, sleep-tousled and yawning. Couldn't sleep? I asked. Softly. He shook his head, padding over to join me on the window seat. I had a dream about Mom, he admitted. Not a nightmare this time, just a dream. Do you want to talk about it? He considered this, then nodded. In my dream, she was like before. Before she started hurting Dad. She was reading me a story and she looked sad. He glanced up at me. Is it okay that sometimes I remember good things too? Even though she did bad things? I drew him close, this wise child who continued to teach me about compassion's complexity. Of course it is. People aren't just one thing, Caleb. Your mother made terrible choices, but that doesn't erase the moments when she loved you. You're allowed to keep those memories. He seemed to relax at this permission, leaning against me as we gazed at the stars. Do you think we'll be okay now? He asked after a while. I thought of Eric's foundation plans, of Chris and Sarah's upcoming wedding, of Joe's stable health, of this home we had rebuilt from within, of Caleb himself, resilient, compassionate, stronger for having faced truth at such a young age. Yes, I told him with absolute certainty. We already are. The truth that had nearly torn us apart had ultimately become our salvation, not just in that operating room a year ago, but every day since, as we chose transparency over deception, healing over hatred, rebuilding over retreat. Our victory wasn't in defeating Kimberly or seeing justice served, though those things mattered. It was in reclaiming our authentic selves, in refusing to be defined by betrayal, in discovering that family bonds formed in truth were unbreakable. Some might call it a happy ending, but I knew better. It wasn't an ending at all, but a continuation. A story still being written in quiet moments like this, with a child's head resting against my shoulder and stars winking overhead like distant witnesses to our resilience. "Grandma?" Caleb murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm glad I found that." Phone. I'm glad I was brave that day. I kissed the top of his head, gratitude overwhelming me for this child who had saved us all. So am I. The truth may not always be easy, but it's always worth fighting for. As Caleb drifted back to sleep beside me, I thought about how the most profound revelations often come from unexpected sources, how a child's courage had exposed a terrible truth. Yes, but also revealed a deeper one. That genuine love cannot coexist with deception. That family means protection rather than exploitation. That dignity comes not from revenge, but from rebuilding with integrity. In the quiet of that moment, watching over my sleeping grandson beneath a canopy of stars, I felt a peace that transcended understanding. The serenity that comes not from avoiding life's storms, but from weathering them together and emerging, changed but unbroken, into the clear light of truth.